Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to go through an example of rhetorical analysis for an article that looks a lot like the ones that you all are working with. Several of you have indicated that you are a little unsure how to approach this topic, how to actually do the work of analysis, and specifically how to write about it. So I'm going to make a short series of videos that takes just little pieces of the analysis process and clarifies them to hopefully help you all construct your own arguments as well. So the piece that I'm working with is called Gender in the Classroom by Deborah Tannen. So what I'm going to do is just take you through a little bit of annotation in this video and show you the ways that I think about this piece in terms of analysis, in terms of what the author is doing, why she's doing it, and how well she's doing it. So I'll go ahead and get started here with the I have my add a comment button right here for annotation, and we'll just go ahead and go through some of the pieces of this together. I'm not going to read the whole text because that would take too much time, but I am going to hit some key points and some key quotes that I was looking at and focusing on when I read this piece for myself. So we're going to go ahead and start with this second paragraph. She says, "The primary focus of my linguistic research always has been the language of everyday conversation. One facet of this is conversational style, how different regional, ethnic, and class backgrounds, as well as age and gender, result in different ways of using language to communicate. You just don't understand is about the conversational styles of women and men." So between this and then the above paragraph, I understand that she is immediately making an appeal to ethos. She is setting herself up as an expert, and she is giving us a little bit of a resume almost. So she's telling us she wrote a book about, gender and communication, that she teaches, that she has things that make her credible. So in the rest of this paragraph, she says, "As I gained more insight into typically male and female ways of using language, I began to suspect that some of the causes of the troubling facts that women who go to single-sex schools do better in later life, and that when young women sit next to young men in classrooms, the males talk more. This is not to say that all men talk in class, nor that no women do. It is simply that a greater percentage of discussion time is taken by men's voices." So what this section, I began to suspect some of the causes, what this sentence tells me is that she is kind of learning and growing in her study, that she is learning slowly over time, and the way that I read this is that it makes her more credible because she's willing to admit that she has had to grow. So showing her own growth to me as a reader is more credible than her just kind of acting like she has all of the answers to begin with. So I'm not going to read this paragraph, but she does a couple of things here. For the most part, what she's doing is that she is setting up some background about gendered communication, about how it operates, about what it is like, especially for children. So this tells us some background on the topic. And then I'm going to comment again here because she's using logos by bringing in other researchers who have come before her. And she's using their evidence to make her argument. So if we move on down, we see that she then shifts to discussing how this gendered communication operates in the classroom space. She says, "These patterns have stunning implications for classroom interaction. Most faculty members assume that participating in class discussion is a necessary part of successful performance. Yet speaking in a classroom is more congenial to boys' language experience than to girls, since it entails putting oneself forward in front of a large group of people, many of whom are strangers, and at least one of whom is sure to judge speakers' knowledge and intelligence by their verbal display." So then she narrows this down to her actual topic. Of classroom discussions. So I see here that she's going to be speaking explicitly about the discussion process in the classroom. Now she follows this up by talking about debate-like formats as a learning tool. So she's getting into specific aspects of classroom discussion. But the rest of this paragraph and the next paragraph has more to do with general study and anthropology about gendered language. Here's what she says. Our educational system is fundamentally male in that the pursuit of knowledge is believed to be achieved by ritual opposition, public display followed by argument and challenge. Father Ong demonstrates that ritual opposition, what he calls adversativeness or agonism, is fundamental to the way most males approach almost any activity. But ritual opposition is antithetical to the way most females learn and like to interact. It's not that females don't fight, but that they don't fight for fun. They don't ritualize opposition. Anthropologists working in widely disparate parts of the world have found contrasting verbal rituals for women and men. Women in completely unrelated cultures engage in ritual laments. Men do not take part in laments. They have their own, very different verbal ritual, a contest, a war of words in which they vie with each other to devise clever insults. So here is really kind of my first personal critique. This paragraph especially, I don't think that she's wrong. Obviously, she knows more about this than me. And also, she's very careful to use language like most men, most women. But in my own learning, in my own understanding, this tendency for women and men to speak in different ways seems to be more a function of sort of patriarchal societies rather than inherent biological traits. I would be interested to hear her thoughts on whether there is any kind of biological aspect to the ways that we communicate, because that might alter how credible I find her to be. But she does seem to be moving toward a discussion of how to make classroom spaces more equitable for everyone, which would in practice make any misgivings a moot point. So she does give, or rather she does make moves toward a sense of biological essentialism that I personally find a little distressing, but also because she seems to be talking about how to make classroom discussions work for everybody, I as a teacher can use that to say that, you know, no matter what your personal learning style is, whether you're more talkative or less talkative, no matter what your gender, I think that I'm still going to largely agree with her and take away something very useful. So I'm not even calling this a critique so much as a potential critique, or the potential for a misgiving. And then I'm just going to write down what I said so that I don't lose this note. So in function of, so there we are, there's my comment, and obviously it was a pretty long one. Now, my next sort of thought is that what she's really discussing here, or seems to be moving toward, is the concept of differentiation in the classroom, of how to differentiate. So it seems like she's going to be talking about how a teacher, how a professor can create classroom discussions that meet the needs of everyone. I'm actually going to add a comment onto this one, or edit this one, because this also reminds me of the concept of universal design. Now, universal design is the concept that you angle your design of either a physical space or a conceptual space so that it meets the needs of anyone who has a particular special or differentiated need, but then it's something that works for everyone. So right now, something that we do that is universal design is actually meeting online. Because think about, you may have a disabled professor or a disabled student, someone who may be homebound, but then remote classes allow them to still participate fully. Think also of in physical space where you would see a ramp instead of a staircase. Anyone can use a ramp, but wheelchair users cannot use stairs. So by putting in a ramp for everyone, everyone's needs are met, no matter what. It's sort of a squares and rectangles situation, but for design, right? Not everyone can use one thing, but everybody can use this other thing, so we should just use this other thing that everyone can use. So that's what this reminds me of, is sort of how to create universal design in the classroom. So I'm probably going to bring that up in my paper, is this concept of universal design, even though she never uses that language herself. So then in the next several paragraphs, what she's doing is she's bringing up anecdotal evidence that discusses different pieces of what she's discussing. So this is all anecdotal, and then we see that this is all anecdotal evidence as well, all the way down to here. This is all anecdotal evidence that looks at the issue from different angles. So it's almost like she's holding this problem up to the light, matching it with her personal experience and the experiences of her colleagues, and sort of saying, well, you know, how does this tendency for classroom discussion to be unequal in gendered ways, how does it look in practice? And she actually discusses this in terms of teachers as well as students. You know, this is the male teacher's experience, and then this is her own experience. Oops. So because she's offering so many different kinds of evidence here, she's giving a lot of theoretical background, she's giving kind of her own entry into this topic, she's giving lots of anecdotal evidence that really looks at it from different angles. I'm finding her very credible, especially because so far she isn't giving me any easy answers. If she was saying, this is a problem and this is the one way that we fix it, I would actually find her less credible, because the way that she's setting this problem up is that it's really complex and it is going to be different in every situation. In fact, as we scroll on down here, what we're going to see is how she goes about trying to come to some kind of answer. But before she does that, she actually tries to analyze the examples that she's found so far. And what she's doing here is she's really trying to think through. Her thinking is on display for us. And again, I find this personally very credible. What she does next is she shows us her own experimentation. She runs an experiment in her own class, so this would be an example of logos. And as a professor of linguistics, this makes total sense that she would know how to perform this kind of experimentation. So I trust this experiment because almost meta-analytically, she is an expert on this very subject. Now her experiment is to use small groups in the classroom. She mixes them up a little bit. She asks her students specifically to metacognitively pay attention to how they feel in the group. I also want to underline this line right here. Treating people the same is not equal treatment if they are not the same. This is what we call equity instead of equality, and I would absolutely want to use that if I was writing a paper. Finally, two things I find effective here. One, she says the goal of complete equal opportunity in class may not be attainable, and that tells me that she sees the limits in her own work. But she also knows that this is vital work to do anyway, so that a classroom can be as just as possible. Finally, the two things that she does recommend after this experiment are using small groups and also using that very metacognitive observers of their own interaction. So I know this wasn't much, but I hope it helps.